Coursing through open waters in a deadly hunting trio, it's no wonder that the reveal of the redesign of the Spinosaurus caught perhaps the most attention of any moment in the Jurassic World Rebirth trailer. Gone is the classic theropod design, instead supplanted by heft and bulk and meat. Paleontologically accurate features like a boxy sail and a paddle tail are present and accounted for, but they can be hard to parse when the beast's increased mass is taking centre stage. But so can something else. Because whilst all this design analysis has been going on, the most interesting facet of this scene has gone relatively underlooked. Why would a trio of Spinosauruses and a Mosasaurus be working together? As a reminder, this is what Jonathan Bailey's Dr. Loomis says about the Spinosaurs. They're helping the Mosasaur defend territory, stalk, hunt. It would be difficult to say he's wrong. In the brief glimpses of the sequence we get, we can see the three Spinosaurs circling in on the encroaching ship, whilst the Mosasaur, showing no desire to attack the much more palatable creatures, patrols the outer rim of the attack pattern. It stays back, almost like a watchful parent, allowing the children to have an attempt first, holding position unless circumstance forces it to intervene, with deadly results. This too happens during the trailer, with the Mosasaur hurling its tremendous mass into the space besides the ship in an apparent attempt to send it toppling over. As you can see, the Spinosaurs aren't present in this part of the sequence, and in the trailer timeline at least, it occurs only after Scarlett Johansson's Zora has locked, loaded and assumedly fired her gun. It feels almost protective from the Mosasaurus. It's not hard to see why the Spinosaurs would want to work with the Mosasaurus. Despite the film presenting them as adept aquatic manoeuvrers, they can't stack up against the size nor perfect adaptation to the open seas that a Mosasaurus would have. The question then is, why would the Mosasaurus be working with the Spinosaurs? Before we examine any natural biological impetuses, there is a potentially simple answer. It's coded to do so. There's still so much we don't know about this unnamed island and the dinosaur breeding that went on there, but we do know that these are regarded as the animals that were too dangerous to be transported over to the main Isla Nublar facility. Whilst the InGen and perhaps Parkogenics team were working on these animals, figuring out their genome, plugging the gaps as best they could they have done some tinkering of their own? The use of dinosaurs as weapons of war is not one that has ever personally sat well with me. I just don't find it narratively interesting. But the idea of these resurrected prehistoric lifeforms having utility to humans outside of their mere presence and existence has been tackled in most of the Jurassic World era of material. It's a well-established facet of the canon by now that humans, we simply can't leave alone. We can't just appreciate these animals for what they are. They need to be modified further, they need to be packaged up and sold to the highest bidder. They need to be taught to kill on command. The Spinosaurs as an initial strike force, whilst the Mosasaur patrols nearby ready to stymie potential escape attempts, could make a lot of sense as a battle tactic. But thankfully, I don't think this is what we're seeing here. It doesn't really fit tonally with Jurassic World Rebirth from what we've seen, or particularly well with the timeline of genetic development we've seen so far. The other option then is that this is a natural adaptation, a symbiotic relationship between the two species as they stalk, hunt, and defend territory. But this theory is not without its own quandaries, because what exactly are they defending their territory against? Our modern oceans lack predators that could reasonably trouble a Mosasaurus, and whilst the Jurassic World era Mosasaurus is assumedly still out there roaming the open oceans, the odds it would stumble upon this diminutive island seem almost impossibly small. If the wider seas can't present a threat, then there's really only two options left. They're defending against humans, or InGen have made something else we haven't seen yet. There's been no hint of more aquatic creatures in the toy lines or rumours about the film, but if there was another large prehistoric species that we haven't seen yet, perhaps one that naturally stacks up well against the Mosasaurus, is aggressive enough to pose a threat to the Spinosaurs, and is gobbling up the local food sources, then that could drive the two disparate creatures to work together for the common good. There's no real smoke to this theory though, other than that growingly suspicious megalodon jaw back at the Suriname bar. I'd be very impressed if they managed to keep that under wraps, and the alternative does seem more likely. If humans, either InGen teams, ignorant tourists, or even purposeful visitors from the Suriname port, also attempted to breach the island, then the Mosasaurus wouldn't necessarily find it easy to tackle the smaller ships they would utilise. Whilst it's undoubtedly an apex predator, its only real method of attack against a ship is what we see in the trailer, flinging itself into the air and hoping to destabilise the vessel in the process, or perhaps hoping to collide with it from below and therefore turn it over. The Spinosaurus, on the other hand, as we also see, is capable of literally clambering up onto the ship itself, and their relatively smaller size likely makes manoeuvring in the small water channels of the island a lot easier than it is for the Mosasaurus, which could scarcely have room to pivot between some of these rocky outcrops. It's seeming more and more likely that InGen is still utilising the laboratory on this island in the modern age, so naturally they would need to send people there. And whilst you could argue they'd simply use helicopters, that presents its own problems. You've got an inability to transport larger quantities of supplies, and you've also got the vicious patrols of the airborne Quetzalcoatlus. I think this does stack up somewhat and is probably the most likely cause of this symbiotic relationship, though you do have to stretch reason somewhat to think the Mosasaur and the Spinosaurus would both have the compatible intelligence to reach this conclusion and therefore collaborate. And there is still another question we haven't answered. Why is the Mosasaurus even here? The Mosasaurus, the real Mosasaurus, has what's known as a cosmopolitan distribution. This is an animal with a habitat that stretches essentially the breadth of the globe, with allowance for exceptions such as polar environments. Humans, for example, are cosmopolitan, and so are a number of extant aquatic animals like orcas, blue whales, and great white sharks. These creatures are typically highly adaptable and capable of living in a variety of different conditions. And in the case of these oceanic creatures, one of the reasons they travel so far is to follow the migratory patterns of their prey. Now, the Mosasaurus is a hyper predator, an apex predator, one that's going to need to consume a huge amount of biomass to keep itself sustained. Why then is such a predator restricting itself to the waterways of this unnamed island? So much so that it wishes to protect this small territory and has formed a symbiotic relationship to do so. Now, I'm not convinced the filmmakers have thought too much about this beyond the rule of cool, which I don't have an issue with for what it's worth, but I do have a couple of theories that could potentially explain all of these issues. And one of them is quite simply, the Mosasaurus is pregnant. Blue whales are, as mentioned, cosmopolitan in their distribution, but their traversal between the colder Arctic waters and warmer equatorial ones is dictated by their breeding season. You see, cold oceanic water is typically more nutrient dense than warm water because of a process known as upwelling. And this is a process wherein cold, nutritious water from the depths of the oceans swells upwards as warmer surface water is pushed away by the winds. So many nutrients naturally attracts animal life such as krill, and so blue whales do most of their feeding in cold waters before moving to the comfort of warm equatorial waters to breed. Their babies lack the blubber to keep themselves warm in those colder hunting waters. The whales will then remain in the warm waters for months until the babies are capable of migrating safely to the cold waters to begin feeding. If we apply the same behaviour to a Mosasaurus, recent studies do suggest that Mosasaurs may have been endothermic, i.e. warm-blooded, and more recent evidence from a 2020 Russian study suggests that they could have been capable of hunting in and surviving polar temperatures, and that such habitat behaviour would tentatively support a migratory pattern and possible breeding behaviour akin to animals like our modern blue whale. So, our Mosasaurus could be pregnant, perhaps there's several of them and they're breeding, or its DNA is plugged with animals that allow it to breed asexually via parthenogenesis, just like Blue did in the Jurassic World films. If this is the case, then its reluctance to leave the warm equatorial waters of the island begin to make more sense. It isn't the feeding season, so its demands are lower, and naturally it's going to be more defensive and less aggressive during such a turbulent period of its life. Therefore, perhaps it grows to rely on the Spinosaurus to handle small prey and intruders, while still assisting them by attacking trespassers that they struggle to repel. This is one of the very few reasons I can see why a Mosasaurus would ever want to defend territory, as Loomis states, and helps justify its collaboration with an undeniably less capable aquatic hunter. Alternatively, it's already given birth, and the baby isn't yet capable of leaving the territory of the island, and whilst the Mosa is capable of taking down large potential predators, after all there are still sharks and the like in these oceans, It is going to be less adept at smaller predators that might be willing to target a weaker juvenile mosasaur. Therefore, the Mosa relies on the Spinosaurus to tackle such predators. Mutualistic relationships are common in nature, with my personal favourite being the harmony between gobies and shrimp, where the gobies will essentially act as a sentry for the pistol shrimp, with both animals retreating to a shared burrow created by the shrimp in case of danger. And thinking about this relationship led me directly to a new idea. What if the Mosasaurus is blind? If we zoom in on its eyes during the attack scene, it's undeniable that there's a hazy, milky quality to its pupils that stands in stark contrast to the pitch black of modern aquatic hunters like, say, a great white shark. If the Mosasaurus is blind, it may be hesitant to venture into the open oceans where it would be left to fend for itself in the dark, and this might go some way to explaining the behaviour we see here. You could see the Spinosaurus then as an equivalent of the laser pointer for the Jurassic World raptors. They're a targeting system essentially, leading the initial attack on the prey, and in the process their movements and roars telling the much larger Mosasaurus where to strike. This theory came to me really late in the script writing and only because of the pistol shrimp mention, but it's grown on me very quickly, as it also ties in with the idea that they don't really know what they're doing on this island, they're making mistakes, they're causing mutations in these animals. We've seen the D-Rex, we've seen the two-headed raptor. Why not a blind Mosasaurus? I really like this theory and I might be promoting it to my number one. Regardless, these mutualistic relationships are rarely, if ever, seen between potential apex predators in situations such as this. For this to be biologically justifiable, I think there has to be an external factor we haven't seen yet, or haven't been told about at the very least. An unknown force acting upon the animals, an unknown pregnancy, an unknown malady like the blindness, an unknown predator. There is something out there that's driving these capable hunters to work together, but is it the unfortunate genetic mutation of the Mosasaurus, or the potential beauty of a newborn creature, or is there something even more dangerous lurking in the waters of the island?